welcome to our conversation today. Today we're going to be talking about data collection. It's quite a basic topic, so it's more like a refresher than a webinar or an in-depth training. Just a refresher of basic things in this mail space. And it comes from a recent experience that I've had with a team that was in the field. So I really hope that you have an interesting time listening to this and let me know what feedback you have, any questions and all that. My name is Dr. Fadare, and I've worked as an evaluation specialist for the longest time. So yeah, welcome. Today I want us to look at data collection. Like I said, I had a team recently in the field, and as part of the quality assurance process, I was listening to some of the audio files and realized that for some of the moderators at the qualitative sessions, their approach to data collection was quite off, the way they asked the questions and all that. And I felt it would be good for us to have a refresher on that. So yeah, what is data collection? Simple, the process of collecting data from people. And it seems like something that is very basic, but in our social development world, it's quite important. Reason being that we require data collection to generate insights for a lot of things, because the social development space rests on evidence-based decision making. Also, a lot of the work that is done in our projects inform policy. So you don't want your policy to be off. You want it to be based on real evidence. And so either for research where you are looking at identifying gaps that an intervention would address, or identifying approaches that are best suited to fill those gaps that your intervention would address, you need data collection for research, for generating research insight. You also need data collection for evaluating an intervention and seeing the degree to which that intervention has met whatever benchmarks were set for it at the start of the implementation period or at some point during the implementation period. Also, if you want to learn about how your work has progressed, what has worked well, what hasn't, and how to make better progress, you need to get information from people. So the data collection process is quite basic, but it's very, very important. And there are two types of data that we can collect. There's the quantitative data, which refers to quantity, which refers to numbers. Okay, so quantitative numerical data, and then there's the qualitative data, which is everything that is not the quantitative data. So when you look at qualitative data, you're looking at the experiences, the narratives, the perceptions that people have to a particular social phenomenon or their experience of that social phenomenon. And when we're talking of qualitative data, there are different approaches that we can use to generate it. Okay, we can have interviews, and interviews are just rich discussions with an individual. So you're speaking to one-on-one, you're having one-on-one conversations with another individual to get the person's insights, to get the person's perceptions of something that has happened. And there are two types of interviews that we generally hold. You could have what is called an in-depth interview and a key informant interview. An in-depth interview is a discussion with anybody in a particular matter. You want to really understand what's going on in a particular scenario. You call somebody who is exposed to that scenario and you have a conversation using some sort of data collection tool. So it could be a structured interview guide or a semi-structured interview guide where you have a set of questions that you want the person to answer, and if the person answers, they provide information that address your objectives. So take, for instance, you want to understand the operations of a market. There are different people that you could approach. You just approach, what's your experience of this market? When does the market open? What can you buy? What's the general approach to pricing? What kind of goods or services can you find in this market? So that's an in-depth interview, really thorough. Anybody can be asked questions. Then you also have what is called the key informant interview. Key informant being somebody who has more insight than the average person on whatever it is you're studying. So that social phenomenon you're studying, somebody that is almost like an expert, or somebody that has more information than the average person on the street. So in this market scenario that I've painted, maybe the head of the Market Women's Association is a good example of a key informant. The head of the Butchers Association is another good example of a key informant. Someone from the admin team, the market administrative office, someone from that team is a good example of a key informant, because they would have information that the average person may not have, and that helps you to provide some rich or additional context to the information you've gotten from the ordinary person who you've questioned in your in-depth interview. So when you talk of interviews, you could have the key informant interview, you could also have the in-depth interview. Another approach that we use for qualitative data generation is the focus group discussion. So this is a discussion amongst a group of people, usually people that have similarities. So it could be similarities in gender, similarities in age, similarities that make their exposure to that phenomenon that you're studying, that makes their exposure to it to be unique. Like they all have like a standardized exposure to it, but they have a diversity of opinions about it. I don't know if you understand what I mean. So in a focus group, you don't necessarily want people that have the same opinions, yeah, having that conversation. You want it to be that it's people who can provide varied aspects and varied experiences of that thing that you're studying. So yeah, that's a focus group discussion, and there are different types of focus group discussions. Usually you would have it to be between 8 to 10 people, or rather no more than 8 to 10 people, but you could have smaller discussion groups. So some call it a triad, 3 people, or a small discussion group. So just 3 people, have a conversation with them, not really big. And you want to make sure that the dynamics, anyway, yeah, that's what we're talking about. That's what we're going to be talking about. So let me not speak too much about it now. But yeah, you could have the full discussion group, which is about 8 to 10 people, and then you could have a smaller one. In addition to those two, those are the most popular approaches. You could also have what's called an expert panel, where you bring folks who have expertise in the subject matter that you want to investigate. You bring folks who have expertise in that subject matter, and then you ask them questions. So that's an expert panel. And you could also have case studies. A case study is when you pick the occurrence, a particular occurrence that is unique in whatever the subject is you're investigating, and you want to trace all the things that led to the occurrence of that case. So it could be that you want to look at the factors that influenced the case to occur, or you want to look at the things, the risks that, whatever it is that has caused that particular case to occur, you want to investigate it further. So yeah. Another type of qualitative data collection is the document review. I don't really like it. But a document review is looking at reports, fact sheets, information that has previously been documented by another author, either from primary or secondary sources, but you want to look at information that already exists on that thing that you're studying, and then pull out from those different documents, pull out some narrative that informs the objectives of why you are collecting the data in the first place. The final one I want to talk about is the observation. And observation is where whatever it is that you're studying is going on naturally, and then you are just observing. So it could be that, for instance, using again the example of the market, people are just going about the market, and you, the researcher or the evaluator, is with them and observing how they are going about their activities in the market and the interactions that are happening. So yeah, we have those types of qualitative data gathering approaches. So when you're gathering data through a qualitative approach, what are the things that you should consider? I'm going to look at this from 2 perspectives. The perspective of the person that is in the field doing the actual data generation, as well as the person that is designing the process of collecting the data. Sometimes they're not, sometimes it's the same person. I do my design and I go to the field and I'm the one that is collecting the data myself. Sometimes it's not. A separate person designs everything and another person is the one collecting the data. Regardless of how it is, there must be some structure. So people usually think that when you're collecting qualitative data, it's structureless and formless like the world was before, you know, before creation started. But that's not how qualitative data is. Qualitative data comes with some form of structure and design, starting with what your objectives are for collecting that data set. What do you want to do with it? What kind of insight would you like to generate? How do you want to proceed with the information when you get it? So there has to be some sort of design element. Who do you want to answer your questions? Where is this person located? How do you make sure that the questions you ask address those objectives that you had at the beginning? So you want to usually have a guide that helps you with the conversation or helps the person that is facilitating that qualitative session with the process of data collection. So you would have some sort of either structured guide or semi-structured guide. A structured guide is where you have the possibility of the answers you can give are fixed. Yeah, so you already have maybe categories of answers and the person just responds into those categories. Usually for qualitative sessions, you would have a semi-structured guide where there are some fixed responses and then there are also opportunities for the individual or individuals that you are encountering to provide their own flexible response to the questions that are asked. So you can't have a qualitative session without some sort of guide. It's very important. There will usually be some sort of semi-structured guide, but it's very important that you have that guide. And you want to make sure that the folks who are going to the field understand the guide. They understand the objectives of the whole process and why you are even collecting the information in the first place. So you're not just saying, oh, go to the field and ask these questions for me. No, but they understand maybe there are sections to the guide and the sections have different types of questions and you want them to understand why you have those questions. Or you could have different guides for different kind of respondents that you're going to have in the field. And you want them to understand why those respondents are the ones that you have chosen. So it's very important that you have a guide. Maybe you have several guides depending on your respondents, and that you are able to communicate how your guide correlates with the purpose for which you're doing the data collection in the first place. I think it's critical. I think another thing that is important in the design element is to also design for permissions and approvals. Sometimes we go to the field and we haven't considered that we need approvals, maybe from officials, from administrative officials, or from community leaders. We haven't considered that we need approval. So it's important to think about how you're going to get your approval before the individual that is going to help you to generate that information is even approached, so that everything is done right. I recently had to go to the field. This time it was to collect data for learning. I had to conduct some learning workshops and I traveled to another country to collect the data and got there and found out that letters had not been written to inform the ministry that we wanted to collect the data. So it was quite frustrating, but we had to write. The ministry gave us approval. Unfortunately, in writing the letter, the request for approval for people to come for the workshop was not included. So we had a letter informing the ministry that we wanted to do this work and approval was given for us to do the work. What we wanted to do was to conduct learning workshops. And for a workshop, people have to travel to attend. Our letter did not include that. The people that were invited to the workshop had to travel to attend. So by this time, we had already delayed, the team on the ground had already delayed me to get the approvals. And it will now be, oh, we need to write another letter to get people to travel. And I was like, no, let's change the methodologies because time is going and you have to demonstrate value for money in your work. So let's change the methodology from workshops to visits. So instead of learning workshops, we now had learning visits. And I traveled to the different provinces to meet those people. So getting the necessary approvals is quite important for us to get the work done. For some type of work, you need to get ethical clearance. So make sure all those things in designing your work, make sure all those things are in place before you even begin to commence data collection. And if you're on the other side, you are the data collector or the moderator, what are things that you should put in place? I've already mentioned that the design of the data collection process must include some sort of training to bring awareness of the questions in the guide and how those relate to the objective. So if you're a moderator, ensure you participate in that session. Make sure you ask any questions of what you do not understand because you are the face of the process when everyone is in the field. So make sure to ask, oh, I don't understand this section. How are we supposed to ask this section? Who are we asking these questions of? Where is the consent from? What are all the things that I'm supposed to do while I am in the field? Ask those questions. Feel free. It's not just go and do and come back because you remember you're also building your professional reputation as you do your work as a moderator or facilitator of qualitative sessions. So come correct, come as a professional. If there are gaps, identify those gaps and ask questions. Never be ashamed to ask questions. I had a manager, one of my first managers, one of the things she always said was the 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 only stupid question is the unasked question. Lots of times we don't want to ask because we feel we're going to look stupid. I think they will now think I don't know how to do this thing. No, ask a question. Ask it in the best way possible and then learn. It's very, very important. So be a part of that training session that helps to understand the data collection tool. Ask questions and make sure that you know what the study is about. I've listened to some audios where the moderators could not pronounce the name of the organization they were collecting data for. They were stumbling over the name. And these people gave you a contract, they invited you to a training, and you don't know their name. That does not speak well of you and your professionalism. So be sure that you understand what you are expected to do. That's the first thing. The second thing is that data collection tool, that guide, make it your own. Aside from the training, sit down with it. It's your job. It's what you're earning an income from and what you're growing your career in. Sit down and make it your own. Look at the questions, read it to yourself so that it almost comes naturally to you when you're asking the questions. It's a natural process. You're not stumbling over the words. You're not saying and your data collection tool is in front of you. The grammar is not beginning to look funny to you when you are in the field. Because I've listened to some audios and I've seen people, they have a data collection tool either on their phone or a piece of printed paper and they can't ask the question very well. And I'm wondering, why can't you ask the question? Because you had the data collection tool. You even have it in front of you, but you are not reading it well. Your words are disjointed. So take that time and practice the words so that whoever your interview respondent is actually understands the question. That's the reason why you have to ask the question in the most fluent and fluid way possible so that the person that is on the other end understands the question. Okay, and you want to be sure that that question that is understood is answered properly. Some organizations, some people who design data collection tools would even test it before they do the training. So it tests sort of like a test of the data of the questions would have been done before that data collection tool is signed off. But the fact that it has been tested and found to be valid does not mean that you, the person collecting data, cannot botch things up. So read the guide properly, make it your own. And when you are in the field asking those questions, ask the questions confidently ask the questions in a fluent way. And if you find out that the individual that you are asking questions of does not understand, be slower. Read the question again in a slow way. If it's a language issue, switch to the language that the person is most comfortable in. Because a lot of the time, our data collection tools may have been designed in maybe English, for instance. And while the respondent understands English, English is not a first language. So you may want to switch to that person's language, be it Yoruba or Hausa or Igbo, even if the original design was not in the person's primary language. So that's quite important. Another thing about data collection techniques is, and this is for when you have a focus group discussion. So if you're delivering a focus group discussion, you may want to you may find out that one person is hogging the conversation. So within the people, you may have somebody may have come out as a natural leader with maybe very strong opinions, and everybody just waits for that individual to finish speaking before they speak. Now, the point of a focus group discussion is to have a diversity of opinions. So you don't want one person to hog the session. You want it to be really wholesome and for different opinions to come true. Sometimes you may even want a particular opinion. You want to know if it is strongly felt by others. But one person just keeps talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. Maybe the person is a talkative like me. So you as the facilitator, you need to be really polite but firm in how you come in and make sure there's flow amongst your participants in a focus group discussion. Now, I listened to an audio where somebody actually spoke to the dominant person and said, you have been speaking for long, let others speak now. I didn't think that was appropriate. Reason being that this is somebody that you have invited, and those choice of words did not seem very polite. So there are other ways that you can go about that. One is when the person pauses. So when the dominant speaker, when you're speaking, you need air. You need to breathe while you're speaking, and usually you would pause to get enough air into your system and then continue speaking. So you as a facilitator, listen for that pause. You know that this person is talking a lot. So you are listening for the person to just pause to breathe. And then you just naturally go in to say, okay, thank you. Speaker B, would you like to also say something? So that's one way of of making sure that the conversation flows without interjecting the speaker, because you also don't want to speak in a way that that person doesn't speak again. So another way that you can do that is to ask a question and say, let's start from speaker Y. Maybe speaker A has been dominating the conversation. So you ask a question and then you direct who should speak first and give that person the opportunity to speak. The person may not be ready. Maybe the dominant speaker that is ready, because that person probably thinks on his or her feet faster than others. So in that kind of situation, you also allow that dominant speaker to speak, but you now go back and say, oh, speaker Y, have you now had the opportunity to think of your response? Would you like to, say something? One other way is to ask for differing opinions. So speaker A, who is the dominant speaker, has spoken, and then you throw the floor open. Does anyone else have a contrary opinion, or do you all support speaker A? Okay, or speaker A has said something that is generally accepted by everyone. You could also do the third party projection and say, okay, speaker A has said this. This is what most people believe. Are there any other people? They don't have to be here, but are there any other people who believe in something else? What would those people say that is not what speaker A has said? So that's a technique that you can use, or those are techniques that you can use to break that dominant speaker hogging the conversation and not allowing other people to speak. Another one that you can have an issue with when you are having a qualitative conversation is people don't want to speak about sensitive topics. So you find this a lot when the topic is maybe sensitive or controversial. People refrain from saying what's on their mind because, yeah, you may have given them a consent form that says that this is what we're doing with this information that you are giving us. These are all the people who will have exposure to it. We will not share your personal information, but they may not trust you. Trust what you have said, so they are reluctant to share what they they know about that phenomenon that you're studying. So one way I just mentioned it, one way that you can address that is to have or to use third party projection methods. So when you're looking at third party projection methods, you are asking not the person's opinion, but someone else's opinion. What do other people think? What would your mother in law think? What would your father in law think? What would women your age but not you think? What would men your age but not you think? So that third party projection helps them to feel a bit more comfortable that, oh, they don't really want what I have to say. But really, whatever they respond is usually their opinion, but they are just they just have the luxury of not being criticized about that opinion. So you find this a lot in studies that have to do with maybe HIV, things like diseases, sexually contracted diseases, where stigmatization may follow whatever they have to say. You also use this technique a lot in issues that have to do with gender or gender-based violence. So people don't really, those are things that people are not really comfortable speaking about. So where you have those kind of scenarios, just say, oh, so do you know of, for instance, if you're looking at gender-based violence, do you know of women who have experienced beatings from their intimate partner? Yes, I know of those kind of women. So how would those women perceive whatever question they ask a question, or what are the things that make those women susceptible to ask a kind of question? So yeah, those are some techniques that you can use. Another thing is making sure that you have the right people in the room. How do you do that? That you are asking questions of people that are knowledgeable about the topic that you want to investigate. If you are in the field, this lies a lot. The resolution to this issue is it lies a lot with the person who designed the study. That person should have made sure that the category of respondents match their own vision. So there should be a system for getting that category of respondents to the facilitator or the moderator of the qualitative session. What some people will do is to have someone go pre-field work with a qualifying, it's called a qualifying questionnaire, to make sure that they sort of handpick the people that participate in the qualitative sessions. Okay, and then the moderator or facilitator just goes to meet those people. If you are the moderator or the facilitator and that has not been done, you want to check that, oh, do I have the right person? Are they capable of answering these questions that I have? So you're not in a situation where you're asking the question and the person is like, that question, director, somebody is the one that will be best placed. So I think you need to go and see them after we've had this conversation. So why did you go to director XYZ right from the start? So we need to be really careful about that the respondent in the qualitative session is the right respondent. I'm trying to see if there's anything else, but nothing comes to mind. One that's related to respondents. One thing about the field session that is very important is taking notes. So depending on how much resources available, you should have a separate note taker. Ensure that your note taker is actually there taking notes with you. And when you don't have a note taker, but you are recording the conversation, where there are particular things that strike you in the conversation, note them down so you can share them with whoever is leading the investigation or the study. Or when you are writing your own notes at the end, your summary notes, you can include them. Those are the things that make you to stand out as a professional and as an insightful data gatherer. Yeah. So I think that's it for facilitating qualitative sessions, techniques that are really helpful for facilitating qualitative sessions. It's very important that I think these are not like particular techniques, but you don't forget to make sure that everybody has signed the consent form and there's an attendance sheet that has the data for the people that are participating, the time, the location, all those things around the session that you are conducting. So they help you when you're writing your notes that this is where it's coming from, and they also help the transcript, the transcription process and development of the transcript. And when data is being analyzed, it helps the person that is doing the analysis to understand the demographic and how that may influence the feedback that is received. Finally, never ever forget to say thank you. Usually, whatever place where you are having the session should have been cleaned beforehand. So, usually, it will be a community location. Ensure that there's also some sort of plan for it to be cleaned up, and whatever compensation, if you're going to give your respondents any compensation is handed out. People are treated nicely. You thank them for giving of their time. So yeah, those are qualitative data collection techniques. Now we'll go to quantitative data collection techniques. So like I said, it's numerical data that is usually subjected to some form of statistical analysis at some point. And what are the considerations that you want to make when you're collecting that kind of data? Again, it starts with the data collection tool. So what kind of data collection tool are you using? You could be using a survey. I think that's the most popular type of data collection for quantitative data. Surveys and questionnaires are the most popular. You could also be having a structured observation as quantitative data. So for instance, you want to observe a training or you want to observe a class, a teacher delivering a class. So you could have questions that every response is quantitative, can be counted or is numerical. So when did the class start? You put in a number. Did the teacher do this? Yes or no? Everything is very closed, so it can be quantified. Another way that we generate quantitative data is through records. So admin data, you can also look at records. So for instance, registers and all that, all those give quantitative data. And then for the more scientific data collection from experiments and tests, we get quantitative data. Now, what are the things that you want to be sure of? Making sure that whatever tool you're using to collect that data is structured, is properly structured, and that there's a flow in how you design the tool, and that the questions are asked in a way that does not create bias. I feel sometimes that we ask questions that the only answer can be a positive answer. Our questions are not neutral. So as much as possible, try to make your questions neutral. This is for the person that is designing the data collection tool now. Try to make your questions neutral. By that, I mean, instead of asking a question like, did participation in this training improve your knowledge of business? That's such a biased question. Did participation in this training improve your knowledge of business? Because you're already hinting that this training was supposed to improve their knowledge of business. And you have alluded to their participation. This is somebody, probably the person was housed for 3 to 5 days for the training, given free food, nice accommodation. Then you want the person to say that, oh, after all this enjoyment, my understanding of business did not improve. Really? You want the person to say that? So a better way of putting that question or phrasing that question would be, how did the training affect your knowledge of business? Simple. Simple. Very simple. There are two different questions. One is unbiased, one is a neutral question. So tell us, oh, the training improved my knowledge. Oh, the training did not improve my knowledge. Oh, the training was a fun time to spend with my friends. So it's important that we do not bias questions. And I think this I should have also mentioned for the qualitative data gathering, because you could also have qualitative questions that are very biased. So to make your questions as neutral as possible, that do not give the individual an indication of what the expected response is, and especially that the response is should be positive. Yeah, I'm trying to. Yeah. Okay. So the first one is make sure that there's a flow in how your questions are asked. Your questions are not disjointed. And then also make sure that your questions are not asked in a way that is biased, that provides biased responses. Again, make sure that your questions relate to your objectives and you don't have love to have questions. There are questions that, oh, if I had all the time in the world, I would love to ask them. But really, you don't have all the time in the world when you are in the field. So keep your questions to what will generate insight on your objectives. I think it's very, very important to emphasize on that. Keep your questions streamlined to what will give you insights on your objectives. And unless it is absolutely necessary, leave the love to haves. Just focus on the need to haves. Maybe you can sprinkle in some nice to have, but stick to don't let your data collection tool be overly long. The reason why I say this is because there's something called interviewee fatigue, where the person is just tired of answering questions and like, I beg, yeah, why am I person's filling out your form like, I thought I answered this already. I thought I answered this already. Also happens in the qualitative interview or qualitative data collection, where somebody will say, as I said before. Once somebody is saying, as I said before, interviewee fatigue is not far off. So you don't want them to be tired and to say, I beg, I'm done with this your question, I beg, or they'll be checking their time or using their keys to hit a table. No, that's not it. Keep it short and simple as much as possible. Then you want to test your tool. Sometimes because we do things in a rush, we do not sufficiently test the validity of our data collection tools. So it's very, very important that we do that. Look for a small sample of people who sort of would represent the people that you would generally be going to ask those questions of in the field, and then have them to complete the tool, run an analysis, and see how the answers are coming out. And if you need to tweak your tool, if people understand your question, if the insights you're gathering can actually feed into the objectives that you started with. So it's very, very important that we pilot test our data collection tools. And another key one is while we're in the field, you, the person who has designed the data collection tool, you want to look at the first 100 cases of the data that you are collected to identify what non-responses are coming up, why, and address them while your team is still in the field. Now, if you are on the other side, you are a data collector or an enumerator, and you're the one that is generating the data. It's similar to the things that you want in a qualitative process. Ensure you have the right permissions and ensure you have the respondents that match the description that is required for that data collection process. The way you ask the question, if you're the one that is asking the question, should not cause a problem, should not lead to a bias, should not generate a different set of responses than what is expected. So make sure that you're asking the questions in the right way if you are the data collector. And for, I think for quantitative data collection process, don't rush the person. At the same time, don't be too slow with asking the questions. Sometimes we use these data collection processes for children, and you find out that for learning assessments, children are not responding well or they're scoring low. Those kind of learning assessments where the questions were not asked as designed may make children seem as though they have not gained the learning that they have. So we should be careful when you are on that, when you have the responsibility of being the one that is asking the questions in a survey, you should be very, very careful of how you ask the questions. So I'm going to round up today's conversation by going into data collection in fragile context. A fragile context being a situation where there may have been some sort of conflict, there may be flooding, there may be an unstable political climate, some sort of natural disaster has happened. So you want to collect data from that kind of place. The first thing is you don't even want to you want to go home. So what are the different approaches that we can use, and what are considerations that we should have at the back of our head when we're using those approaches? One of the key ones for me is participatory data collection. Participatory data collection refers to an involvement of your respondents in the data collection process. And you can use this where you need to do, for instance, some sort of community mapping, where you want like ranking to be done, where you need some sort of cultural sensitivity, and your data collectors are coming from outside of the community. So when you have a participatory approach in place, you have members of the community who themselves are experiencing that phenomenon that is going on that makes that place a fragile context. You have them as members of your team, and usually you find out that they are very happy to involve themselves in an activity that takes them off that issue that makes their community fragile. So first of all, look for approaches that allow you to have members of the community participate in your data collection process. Another approach that you can use is to collect data by mobile telephony. So, or if they have access to the internet, to use internet, some sort of internet-based data collection platform. But in our fragile context, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, mobile telephony is the best because not everywhere has internet access. So you're using the mobile phone, you already have a set of questions and you're just asking them through the phone. Either somebody's placing a call to get to the people in the fragile place, or their text messages that they're SMS based they're SMS based survey questions that they have to complete, and it's formatted that maybe if you answer a question in this way, this is the next text that you will get. You answer that one, this is the next text that you will get. And you want to make sure that again they are focused on only need to haves. Like it's go in, go out, and you are done. You're not spending all the time with somebody on the phone when disaster is going on all around them, or sending them text messages for questions that you are not even going to analyze. So in those kind of contexts, you want to use mobile telephony either for phone calls or text messages, or for some sort of online questionnaire if they have access to the internet. Yeah. And the thing that you could try in a fragile context is rapid assessment tests. So these are tests that you need to be in the field with a field team, but they're quick. And there aren't so many questions. You want to generate your insights and you want to get out as fast as possible. And you also, for qualitative approaches, you want to try to just look for the key informant. I've already explained what a key informant is at the start of this discussion. So look for the key informant, get the information that you need, and leave the place. Make sure that everyone is safe. Now, when you are going to a fragile context for data collection, you must ensure that you do a risk assessment ahead of your trip. Make sure that you understand what risks you will be exposed to and how you are going to address those risks if you do encounter them. Make sure that there's a plan in place for how you're going to respond. So if you're going to an area with flooding, for instance, if the flooding suddenly comes up again, the water comes up again, what are you going to do? How are you going to get out of there? Do you have some sort of support team? Is there an emergency number that you have called? All those kind of things should be in place. Now, people in fragile communities are often facing some sort of disadvantage. So make sure that you get your consent form signed and make sure that everything is done ethically. Promise them anonymity and confidentiality and make sure that you keep them anonymous and their information confidential. It cannot be emphasized enough because it's almost like an agreement that we have between people that give us information and those of us who are professionals in this business of data generation. So ensuring that anonymity and confidentiality is really, really essential. It's very essential. And again, in this fragile context where lives have been affected, things have changed, the setting is not normal. So you don't want to make people feel aggravated by your presence or by the questions that you are asking. So please ensure that that respect for persons is conveyed as you ask your questions. Yeah. And the final one that I'm going to speak about is making sure that you have the right approvals in place. So where you have this kind of fragile context where some sort of calamity has happened, usually there isn't the right administrative presence for approvals to be got. And so it's almost like a free for all. Oh, go and collect the data that you want to collect and go out. It's not proper. You must still make sure that the ethical guidelines that you have put in place for your study are maintained while in the field or before you go to the field. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end of this conversation. It's very, very important. It's essential almost. I think that's the best way to put it. It's essential that after we have designed whatever data collection tool that we have, we put in the right capacity building to make sure the people that are going to help us to collect the data on the field understand the data collection tool, can use it fluently. It's almost like they are the ones that designed and wrote the questions that are being asked. But we must make sure that before the capacity building, the considerations are put in place in how we design the tool, that the right questions are asked. We need to have questions at the focus, the ones that give us direct insight on our objectives for the study that we're going to be, to research or an evaluation or even a learning activity. We're not superfluous in our asking for questions. We're considerate of interviewee fatigue. We're considerate of all the ethical guidelines that bind us as a profession, and we are designing our data collection tool to support the individual that is going to field with it. So there's a natural flow. The questions are presented in a way that is easy to read, and the questions are not too many. At the same time, if you are the individual that is going to field, be it a quantitative or qualitative data generation process, make sure that you are in charge. You know your questions. You are asking your questions in a way that doesn't bias the response that you are going to get. And you are following all the other guidelines that I have provided. I don't want to repeat them as a summary. It's been great having this session. And if you do have any questions, do share them with us and we will make sure that we get a response back to you. Thank you for being with us and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.